Hi guys, Silent Star here, currently on my Demon Hunter for Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls, and today I'd like to show you a build I developed because I got pretty bored of playing the very conventional Cindercoat driven cluster arrow build. Basically what happened to me, I attained a Cindercoat very early, then I found a Mage Fist, and I got locked into fire. And whenever I tried other builds, I found they were just not as good as the cluster arrow build, and I played a lot. I got to T6, I started farming it for a short period of time, and then I got very bored. And I basically just said, screw it, I am going to play a different build, and I decided to see if there was anything really viable that could compete with the cookie cutter build. So this is what I came up with, and I actually find this build very entertaining. It's got me really reinvigorated to play the game again, and it's a lot more fun than cluster arrow. It's high mobility and very high damage. It's just really a lot of fun, and I think if you're feeling any kind of negative feelings towards the Demon Hunter situation currently, I think you should definitely give this a try because it really changed the game for me, and I just love this build. So let's go over it, and I'll explain my reasoning for each of the different skills and abilities I use. So we're going to start out with Strafe. Oops. Alright, so Strafe. Throw knives at nearby enemies for 400% weapon damage while moving at 75% of normal speed, and then I'm using a rune that gives 130% damage on critical hits. So, a little bit about the rune first. Essentially, it's just damage, and the reason I picked it is because this is a physical damage build, which is pretty nice, because if you don't have a Cindercoat, or if you're simply bored of using fire, physical build is probably the second best option Demon Hunters have right now. And we'll look at the damage on Strafe. 400% weapon damage per second, and basically it sounds like a lot, but once you start strafing around, the damage looks pretty hopeless, and I think that's why most people don't use it. But what is actually not so apparent at first is while you're spinning, your damage is basically cut in half and spread over two different attacks. So while the numbers don't look that high, you're still dealing 400% weapon damage, and it's a significant amount. And this is not the main skill in the build. Fan of Knives actually is, but I really love using Strafe. It's a lot of fun, and it's really cool to move around, and it's, you know, instead of just standing there or even orb walking or kiting through conventional means, I really like using Strafe. And basically the reason I use it is a hatred spender that can be used in conjunction with Fan of Knives, which if you take the Knives Expert rune, this also becomes a hatred spender. So instead of having long cooldown and, you know, being a fairly useless skill, when you make it a hatred spender with the Knives Expert rune for a cost of 30 hatred, essentially what that does is allows you to whirl around using Strafe and continuously spam Fan of Knives, which does fantastic damage, 450% damage to all enemies within 20 yards. You can actually catch quite a few mobs at a time doing this. And the really great thing is you put a pretty significant slow on them, 60% for 1 second, but as you're spamming it, they're basically slowed all the time, which is really great because it allows you to use Cult Weak, which is arguably the best or the second best passive Demon Hunters have. And this is actually really nice because the cluster arrow builds rarely use this, because what happens is you use hatred spender or hatred generators initially, which add slows, and then you use them to fuel your cluster arrow. but once you get really geared, you no longer need the hatred generators, which means you no longer have access to slows, which finally means you can't use Call the Weak. So this build gets to use it, and 20% damage is a very huge boost from a passive. That affects all of your damage, and it really is game breaking. So anyway, we'll move on now to the rest of the abilities, which kind of support the attacks. So we've got Preparation, and this one costs 25 Discipline to generate 75 Hatred. And this is a staple in the current meta. Pretty much most builds are using this, and it's just kind of the way it is. It's really, really optimal. And what you do is you use Night Stalker in conjunction with Strafe and Fan of Knives to generate a huge amount of discipline. It just keeps coming in, and then you repeatedly use punishment for preparation, and essentially you just keep getting more and more hatred, which allows you to simultaneously use 2 hatred spenders throughout your whole gameplay experience, which is really, really powerful. And now we move on to Vengeance. The main reason I use this is to get the 10 hatred per second. It does put out a significant amount of damage, especially single target, but getting the 10 hatred per second is really, really useful when you're not under the effect of an empowerment shrine. And also, at times, as I'm spending so much hatred, I can get into some desperate situations, so during those times, click Vengeance, and I can usually stabilize and basically spin the entire time I play. So, now on to Chakram, which you're probably wondering, why would this be in the build? It seems really like an oddball choice, and to compound that further, why am I using Shuriken Cloud? It appears at first glance to be pretty useless, but when you're using it with Strafe, I find you can actually put out some pretty significant damage as you move through the mobs very quickly before they can actually hit you back in melee. So you put out pretty significant damage, but this is one of the real secrets to the Demon Hunter kit right now that I think not many people are aware of, if anyone. And basically, this ability procs with Night Stalker to generate a ton of discipline. And as I said before, tons of discipline with punishment means tons of hatred, which means more spamming. So this entire combination of abilities is really, really powerful, making this a fantastic choice for this particular build. Then I'm using Bat Companion. I use this for solo play because I don't have the Hexing Pants of Mr.Yan, so I need a bit of a boost. But in group play, I can get away with using Wolf Companion because I find when you're doing rifts, it seems like a lot more globes are dropping in a group and everyone's hitting them, and basically I just find I have a lot more hatred generation in group play, thanks to Bloody Vengeance, which is one of the best abilities Demon Hunters have. If you haven't tried it, it's fantastic. It really, really helps, and it's a lot better than most of the damaging passives, especially in a build like this. So, anyway, that's it for the active skills. They can be tweaked slightly, but this assembly I find works really, really well. So, we've already talked about Call the Weak, Bloody Vengeance, Night Stalker. Now we'll move on to Perfectionist. And this is really great. Makes you a bit tankier, but it reduces the discipline cost of your preparation. So that allows you to basically generate more hatred, which is pretty much the name of the game right now. And just one little disclaimer, these passives can basically be tweaked depending on how good your character is at generating and maintaining hatred, like how how low you can get your reduction, so you may be able to exchange some of these for other passives if you find you don't need them. Same thing with Bat Companion. And now I will go on to talk about my gear a little bit, and I will say I was doing T6 for a little while with Cluster Arrow build, and I got bored and I don't use a lot of those pieces of gear. I've kind of started anew, and I use some of my old items, but not many. And anyway, now I'm physical build, and I'll show you what I have. Right now I think I'm about, I'd say very efficient for T3, a little bit less so T4, and then in group play I can do really well with T4, T5 because there's more targets for the enemies, which means I get to dance around with my spinning build and hammer them for tons of damage. So anyway, we'll look at my items. I've got Kamar 10 clip, and this is a very solid bow. You don't need it, but it actually coincidentally is the best bow I've found in terms of DPS, and it is a strafe-oriented build. It basically removes the speed penalty that you get for using strafe, so it's very, very useful, but not a requirement. This one, my Balefire Caster, basically just a high damage generic bow. I'm using it because it's the best I have. I'd much rather have Natalia's Slayer, but I don't. And now I'll show you this. I'm using Captain Crimson's Waders. I'm actually going to be changing that resistance to strafe, but I don't want to do it just yet, as I might become a little too squishy. I'm using Captain Crimson's Thrust for the 3-piece bonus with Ring of Royal Grandeur. And basically the reason I like this set is the cooldown reduction is really, really handy in this build to keep me spinning. And also, the resource cost reduction is huge. 10% is incredible. And this set is not actually best in slot. Hexing Pants of Mr.Yan would be, but I don't have any, and I'm gambling and gambling. I hope I'm going to get them soon, hopefully even today. And anyway, I'll be showing you what they look like later and why they're so useful. So then I'm using this just for the set bonus, basically. It's okay, but I don't really favor attack speed with this build, and I'm basically using this because I just can't get a Stone of Jordan, not even a bad one. And then I'm using Reaper's Wraps. This is basically best in slot. It's just complete god mode. The amount of hatred you get back from this is insane, and I mean, this is really easy to farm. This isn't even that great of a pair. So you pretty much want to get these for almost any Demon Hunter build. For the chest armor, I'm using Natalia's Embrace. I'm going to be switching that life percent to Fan of Knives, but I'm still not sure if this is the chest armor I want to use for this build. So before I make any changes, I'm going to make sure I know what I want. And I'm using Shear's Gloves, Shear's Shoulders. I don't really care about the shoulders, and I want the Gloves of Worship. I think they're best in slot for this build. I'm using Haunt of Vaxo. The passive is going to waste right now, but this amulet has the 4 best primary stats you can have for a physical build, so that's basically why I'm using it. And then I'm using Andariel's Visage. Has physical damage and crit on it. It's really just amazing, and most Demon Hunters don't really get much use of the poison proc because the radius is so minuscule, but since I'm in melee range quite frequently, this actually is pretty handy. And finally, the last item I'll talk about is Sash of Knives. I don't know if they all come with resource cost reduction. I assume they do, but that's a very powerful ability in the belt and shoulder slot. And Fan of Knives, I think it ranges from like 30 to 40 damage. I'm not sure. So this is kind of like a mid-range one, but getting up to 40% Fan of Knives damage in the belt slot is so huge. I think this is best in slot, and this is actually a really amazing item to have for this kind of build. So that covers the build and the gear that I'm using, and I just want to quickly go over a few of the items that I think you should use or try to acquire. So this is Hexing Pants of Mr.Yan. Your resource generation and damage is increased by 25% while moving and decreased while standing still. With this build, you're always moving, so this is as good of an item as you can get next to maybe Stone of Jordan. I mean, it might even be better than Stone of Jordan for this build, but this is a must-have. I cannot wait till I get these. And if you have them, wow, you are lucky. These are amazing pants, and I'm jealous. I'm not gonna lie. Next, we've got the Stone of Jordan. It honestly almost makes me sad looking at it, especially one this well rolled. But while the sheet DPS isn't the greatest on this item, Stone of Jordan is the best item in the game. It puts out so much damage. It's just ridiculous. I mean, it's like, if you have a Stone of Jordan, you're in such a good position, and if you don't, you're so gimped. I mean, this is such a fantastic item. You just pretty much want this on all of your characters. And the last item I want to talk about is Gloves of Worship. This, I think, is best in slot for this particular build, because with 2 Hatred Spenders, you benefit so greatly from empowering shrines, and having them for 10 minutes while you're consistently rifting, you can often keep the effect going if you're really efficient. So this is just really, really awesome. And that basically covers the build. So now I'm going to go to a random place, and I am going to show you what this build can do very briefly, because I think this video might be getting a bit lengthy at this point. I have it on T2 right now. I'm not sure what the lag issue might be while recording with this. So yeah, as you can see, it's pretty respectable damage. It can actually be really good for melting attacks in higher Torment. I wouldn't say I'd be able to do Torment 6 right now, but once I get a few more upgrades, I probably could handle it. So anyway, that covers my video. I hope you liked it, and I hope you give it a try, especially if you're frustrated, because this build is a lot of fun. Really awesome. And anyway, if you enjoyed the video, please thumbs up, and if you want, you can subscribe too. I might be making more builds and different miscellaneous videos in the future. We'll see. But for now, this is what I have to offer you. So, take care and good luck with your drops.